for everyone involved. So I'll talk a little bit more about myself here in a second, but yes, I'm Casey O'Donnell. I'm from Michigan State University. I'm an associate professor in the College of Communication Arts and Sciences in the Department of Media and Information at Michigan State University. So I'm going to talk about game design for jams. I'm going to talk a little bit before I kind of get into that. So a little bit about me. So I started in undergrad as a computer science, mathematics double major with a minor in sociology and a minor in women's studies. And I always joke that that means I was destined for grad school. But at first, my focus was, really on computer science and mathematics. And my first job when I left the university was working for Jet Propulsion Labs in Pasadena, California. And I was working on satellite visualization software. And, pretty much my sole focus was making pretty pictures out of satellite data. And that was fun. But I started posting some of these images on my personal website. And a studio owner, a game studio owner down in La Jolla, contacted me and said, "Hey, looks like you're doing pretty cool stuff. Do you want to come down and work for us?" And so I left Jet Propulsion Labs and I went to a small game studio called 3D Pipeline, where I worked for about 2 years on a variety of projects, one of which was like a helicopter simulator. One of the things that was really funny was, I went there because they had hired me because I made pretty pictures. I was like, "Oh, well, I'm going to make pretty pictures for you." And they were like, no, we want you to work on the audio engine. And that was fine by me because in a lot of ways, sound and light share similar characteristics. But that game studio started to go under. And so I left that company and worked for an Autodesk subcontractor, working predominantly with AutoCAD, but also systems like Revit and later on some of the Max and Maya integration. So, right, games adjacent. But I had never actually shipped a game title, so it became really difficult to get that next game job. But I was fascinated by the game industry, and ultimately, I not just I wanted to study it. I wanted to help people learn how to make games, because one of the things that I learned by making games is that not a lot of people talk about. Oh, I guess I should intro. This is Doki Doki. Doki Doki was a stray until about 2 days ago. So new edition. Anyway, yeah. So now I'm a associate professor of game design and development at Michigan State University. We have an undergraduate program as well as a master's program, and I've been at Michigan State since 2012, and I absolutely love the people that are there, and I love the students that come through our program and the kinds of things that we get to make. So some of you may also know me through my work with Coursera and teaching game design and development there, along with Brian Wynn. And so if you're sort of curious about more of this, that does exist over there. And so you can check it out if you'd like. And increasingly, I'm trying to put more and more of my teaching materials up online for free, where people can find them and benefit from them. So in the meantime, I've been an active game developer. I've worked a great deal on learning games. This was a rabbinical game that we partnered with the Franklin Jewish Academy just outside of Detroit. We joked that we made a Jewish Farmville. I've also worked on science learning games, games focused on biology and biological processes. And more recently, I co-founded a small games collective focused on making what we call affinity games, or games focused on helping people build friendships or connections through common ideas, values. And so this exists out there. But I'm also really interested in game developer culture. And I wrote this book, Developer's Dilemma, back in 2014. And I enjoy studying not just making games, but how people make games and connect through them, and the way that games sort of incorporate culture into their very structure. And so I've been doing this really since 2008. I was quite fortunate, since 2005. And I was really fortunate that the folks at Vicarious Visions allowed me to spend really 3 years of my life with them while they were working on games like Spider-Man 3, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, Guitar Hero for the Nintendo DS and the Wii. And so this book wouldn't exist without them. And so I really appreciate the gift that they gave me by sort of allowing me in their space. The other thing that I want to talk about is that game jams and jams in general are amazing. I have game jammed. I've been game jamming since the first global game jam in 2008. At the time, I was at the University of Georgia, and we didn't have a game program. And I was just like, well, hey, I bet we can get people interested in making games and jamming. And sure enough, we had a relatively small crew, but a bunch of people came together and worked to make a game. And that was a blast. One of my favorite times was in 2011. I traveled with somebody that actually worked for me. At the time, I had a small learning game studio, and one of the guys that I worked with, I was like, hey, do you want to drive down to Atlanta and jam with me? And we did. And one of the things that I loved about this particular jam was that we found a bunch of students from Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, obviously. And they'd made art and they wanted to make games, but they'd never had this chance to work with programmers and designers to come together and make a game. And they didn't know, kind of going into it, that, at least two of us on the team had been making games professionally for a long time. And so they just had a lot of fun, right? And at the end of the weekend, they were like, wow, I didn't know we could do that. We've never done that before. And so that was really meaningful to me, and really powerful. And it helped me sort of see the potential there. It was also around this time. So in addition to loving game jams as a participant, I've been part of studying game jams and seeing what they can do to foster collaboration, communication, develop skills, allow people to explore new ideas. And so that's kind of what I'm going to focus on here, is why these kinds of events are important and exciting. And so, like I said, I'm super excited for everyone participating. But also, want to caution that one of the things that many of us that study game jams, organize game jams, participate in game jams is encouraging people to not sort of take on this kind of crunch culture. And what do I mean when I say crunch? Which is, burning yourself out, working way too much, not sleeping, not eating, not taking care of yourself. Don't do those things. Take care of yourself. And so I'm going to go through and talk a bit about at least, how I approach jams and some encouragement, particularly for those of you that are interested in making a game as part of this jam. So without further ado, I'll launch into this. All right. So first and foremost, right, jams aren't just it's not about trying to make the next new revolutionary piece of technology. Game jams are about people and about new connections and the opportunity to work with new people and get to know them and experience different communication styles, different things that other people get excited about. So don't get lost in just the tech part of it, right? The beauty of a jam is working with other people and getting to know them. And the previous story that I mentioned where, these artists from Savannah, from SCAD, I was at the Game Developers Conference a year later, and 3 of these artists came up. They're like, "Hey, do you remember me from this jam?" I was like, "Yeah, of course." And they're like, "That was so much fun. You have no idea like what that meant." And like those connections live on, right? Especially if you have a really positive experience in this process. So game jams are about people and new connections. And so enjoy the process, not just the outcomes. The other thing that, is just a general piece of advice is that you're going to wear a lot of different hats through the jam, and probably hats that you're not particularly familiar with, right? Some of them should be familiar, but, you might have to make some audio. You might have to make some art. You might have to do some design work. You might have to do things that you've never done before. And that's okay, right? Like that's part of it. Somebody's going to have to keep track of the to-do list and all of those things. So embrace that, right? I think one of the things that, as we move into more professional roles, sometimes we miss that chance to explore and try something new and learn a new skill. Right? So embrace it, love it. But also play to your strengths, right? If you're good at a particular thing, be honest about that. But, also be honest where you may not have a great deal of strength in an area. If you haven't, used a particular game engine or used a particular tool, being honest about that is helpful, right? That doesn't mean you can't learn it, but it helps people understand where you're coming from. But if you're particularly good at something, leverage that. See how you can use that and push your projects forward. Jams are not the time to reinvent the wheel. I joke that I can't tell you how many times I've seen people at a game jam try to make their own physics engine or something, right? Because they're really excited about this project, but then, it's like, oh, well, we need physics. And somebody's like, hey, I can make a physics engine. Please, no, don't do that, right? Don't reinvent the wheel. Use the tools that are out there, right? Lots of software libraries, but recognizing that they all have their own idiosyncrasies and they're going to shape, what you make. So if you can, use tools that you're comfortable with, you're familiar with. unless you have a lot of experience with different game engines, now is probably not the time to learn a brand new game engine or learn a new development environment. Some people, with a lot of experience, can pick up new languages and do things quickly, but play to your strengths. Think small, right? In these compact periods, right, your goal should be to explore something small, try something little and new, and right, you'll see the slide later. Scope down, right? Find something little and play with it and explore it. I think most importantly, and this is why I like to make games, is exploring something meaningful to you. And in a jam, right? Like, you have freedom to try out new things in a way that you often don't elsewhere, right? You think about classes where, somebody is deciding what you need to make, or in the future, if you have clients, right, or an employer, right, they're going to be making decisions about what you're going to make. And so you get to make that decision right now. And that's awesome. Again, scope down. It is better to finish something than not finish anything. I can't tell you how many times I've been at a game jam where people spend, tons of time working, and at the end, they don't have something they can show and play. And that feels awful, right? Especially when other people are sharing the things that they've been able to make, right? So scope down, right? Think small, explore. Ideas are just ideas, right? So it's better to make something and explore and play with that than having this big imagination of an idea, right? And until you really try to build something, you don't really know what its possibilities are, right? Once you start to try to make it, right, it becomes much clearer and firmer, right, and less of an idea. So I'll often encourage people to explore one thing very closely. You can always start to expand your idea, right? But explore that one idea or concept or system or mechanic really closely, and can add later. So oftentimes, right, people struggle with this, what's my inspiration, right? What should I make? I don't know, right? That's up to you. And so oftentimes I'll say, well, if you don't have an idea of what you want to make, start by making something little. Make your favorite little game, right? Whether that's a simple platform game or something like, hey, remember Flappy Bird? Yeah, let's make Flappy Bird. And then along the way, you're going to find something else. You can be like, hey, I have a different idea. I have a better idea, right? But that gives you this nugget of inspiration, right? The other thing that I would say is hop over to a place that hosts lots of little games like Itch, and hop over there and see what other people have made. There are lots of goofy little interesting games that are out there, and trying, even if you start by saying, okay, I want to try to make my version of this, you're going to learn something along the way, and you're going to come up with a different idea, and it's going to evolve, right? But you're also going to learn a lot just by seeing what somebody else has done, saying hey, can I do that? Can I make that happen? And so, the beauty is there are lots of people making goofy, interesting little games now. And so, this is your chance to explore that too. So games are systems, right? And I think one of the things that's wonderful about them is that systems are all around us, right? You think about the number of systems that we interact with all the time. What do I mean when I say that? Well, something that has rules, right? So look to those things that are all around you, right? That surround you. Maybe it's queuing, waiting in line at a grocery store, and think about that, how it's changed now, right? Somebody not wearing a mask at the grocery store, are people standing 6 feet apart, right? Even that has changed, right? There are these systems all around us, and there's no reason you can't play with that as a game. And look, I duplicated a slide. That's great. So oftentimes, right, so if once you start to think about, okay, what is this system and how am I going to interact with it? Well, through a game's mechanics, the actions that you take. Well, so what can you do in a game? And oftentimes those are verbs, right? They're actions. And so what verbs do you want in your game, right? Is it walk, run, jump, all of those things? And those are very conscious choices, right? Not every game needs to have shoot. There are lots, right? Jump, throw, run. And those verbs then interact with the system. Different verbs have different actions and different consequences within the system. And so then you ask yourself, well, how do those actions change the system? And then how does that system change future possible actions, right? And it's this connection between the player. Oh, really? He just knocked my controller off the couch. Gotta love cats. So that's kind of the core of, most things. I think it's tempting to see games as frivolous, trivial. But just like, most computational systems, right? Games are just another example of a whole lot of the things that we interact with that are computational systems, right? Think about a microblogging site, right? There are certainly verbs and an underlying system and data that gets stored. And games are really not that much different from lots of computational systems, except that the feedback loop between player and system is much, much faster, right? Much more rapid. So I know I've said it many times already, but small is beautiful, right? Especially when you're thinking about a game jam. And it's okay for what you make to really just do one thing well, right? And figure out what all you can do with that, right? And so that's okay. Back to my previous comment, it's better to finish something or explore one thing and complete it than it is to try to take on too much, right? I think that's one of the things that has always been good for me when I jam, right? That the more focused you can be, right? You can always expand your scope. You can always add more later, but the more focused you start, the easier it is to actually finish something. So my biggest piece of advice, right? As somebody who has studied uh, what can oftentimes be really awful workplace practices at game companies, right? It's important to take care of yourself. But more importantly, take care of your team. And that means taking care of each other, right? Because in jams, you might have kind of emergent leaders, but everybody's going to wear a leadership hat at some point. And so, when I say your team, I mean that in a really collective sense, right? Take care of each other. My favorite jams, hey, it's, 10 o'clock at night. And I'm like, you know what? I'm tapped out. Hey, everybody, I'm going to bed. You should go to bed soon too. Did you eat? Did you get some sleep? Did you get some breakfast? Like, there's a temptation sometimes with jams to overdo it. And so take care of yourself first and take care of your team as well, right? Everybody should, it shouldn't be a stressful process. There are going to be times, because there's time pressure, right, where you will feel stress, and the best thing to do is help each other through that, deal with that, right? Take care of yourself and take care of your team. So I want to end on, I think there can be this perspective that games are not interesting or not worth sort of the time and effort of making them. And I want to challenge that by saying, no, I think games are actually some of the most important systems that we spend time with. And, that games help us learn. They allow us to explore really complex issues, but they're just really important parts of human culture. And they help us understand the world, because in some ways it abstracts it. But that we also can see beauty in it. I mean, one need only look towards the role that certain sports plays in culture, right? Sports are games. And the rise of esports and live streaming and all of those things, right? Games are very much an important part of our lives and our world. And so it's okay to make games. Games, I don't actually need to justify making them, because games are very much part of who we are as human creatures. And so don't shy away from them. They're beautiful and interesting, and can take on both serious topics and not so serious topics, and that makes them wonderful. So with that, I don't know if we have a way to ask questions, but again, I really just want to say, have fun, enjoy your time, enjoy the new connections that you make, and take care of each other during the jam. So. So the first question that came into the chat is how do you overcome the long time of developing a game? Like that, yes, it can take a long time to make games. Certainly, uh, you know, big games take years and years, and I would even say that relatively small games can take a long time. And so I think the answer to that is um, view what you're making during a jam as a first playable, a starting point, not a finished point. That it is a prototype that you can then take elsewhere further later, right? It's going to be just that first version, that first iteration, right? You're exploring one thing, right? But because you might have access during a jam to somebody that has some artistic skills or has some audio skills that you normally wouldn't, that's going to actually create an opportunity for you. So the answer is again to think really small and also be okay with bugs and it not being perfect. It's a prototype. It's a first idea. It's a first attempt. And, most games that come out of a game jam that go on to become, games that get distributed on, either an app store or on itch, the developers take more time, right? So what you're doing is not making the finished product. It's that first version of it. And so that's what you're doing in a jam. So the second question here is the best place to start. So in part that depends on where you're coming from, what your background is as a potential game maker. If your skills predominantly are, JavaScript and HTML or something like that, work towards, leveraging those skills to make a game. I'm fortunate. Most of my students are coming through our program. And so, we're teaching them to use tools like Unity. We spend a lot of time with that. And so, our students have this advantage of having familiarity with a tool. If you've never used a game engine before, that can seem really daunting. If you're sort of used to making sort of traditional software, but I remember, even when I was first learning to program in my computer science, right, program, like most of what we were doing was text-based through the console, and, but there are a lot of old games that are made that way, right? Text-based game, right? And so thinking small. And so the best start, I would say, is to think about what tools you know and what you can work with that you already know. The nice thing about this particular jam is it sounds like it's over 4 days. So you could allow yourself, that first day to, talk to your team and say, well, hey, do we want to learn a particular game engine? Do we want to spend a little bit of time and we all kind of work together and learn this together? And so whether that's Unity, something like Godot, Corona, there are lots of different game engines out there. And so, wonderfully, there's also a lot of YouTube tutorials. They're not always great, but it's a good place to start. But ideally, you'd come to a jam already knowing some of those tools. The third question was, can I develop my own game alone from A to Z? Yes, you can. Um, uh, I love working with uh, people who are different from me, and so I love to find other people. But by the same token, you just have to recognize that if you're making the game entirely by yourself, that means you're responsible for audio, for visuals, for all the code, and all of those things. And so it's okay if you're using, if you're like, hey, I'm not a graphic artist, um, you know, uh, to you'll have to work around that. You'll have to figure out what you can make with your own limits in mind. So yeah, you can definitely do it, right? If it's a text-based game, heck, maybe you use public domain images, and or art assets from the asset store. There are lots of things that you can do, but my only hesitation with that is possibly missing out on that chance to meet new people and connect with folks, because right, like jams are about people, and I know COVID makes that hard, but it's still really important to kind of connect with others. All right. The next question is advice for students who want to be a game developer. That's a really good question. So, if you want to be a game developer, I would say the best thing you can do is start playing with ideas and trying to make things. You only get better at making games by making games, but then you also have to share them. You have to put them in front of other people and get feedback, and that's not always going to be great feedback. I think that's one of the most harrowing parts of making games, is that the audience definitely talks back to you in interesting ways, not always healthy ways. But you need people to play your thing. And once you start making games, you're a game developer, right? And so nobody gets to tell you whether or not you're a game developer. The moment you start making games, you're a game developer. And then I would encourage you to, Twitter can be kind of a crappy place, but it's also full of game developers. And so Twitter can be a place where you can find mentors, and people will talk about their work. And game dev Twitter, you can learn a lot from those folks. And so start making games, start paying attention to what other people are making. And I'd also say, get outside of your comfort zone, right? If you only ever play one kind of game, you're only ever going to want to make that kind of game. And so what's fun is when you start to see more and more possibilities. So start playing lots of different stuff. All right. So the last question here is, oh, that's a really good question. Okay. So how should I decide whether an idea for a game would work, as it's a long time to sort of get to that satisfying result? That's a great question. And that's the answer to that question is prototyping. And prototyping oftentimes starts with paper, right? And a pen, right? And trying to visualize it. And, maybe that's a virtual whiteboard where you're kind of trying to draw things and talk about what those actions and interactions would be like in a game. But the person asking this question is right? It is difficult to know if that idea is going to be satisfying until you try to make it. And I think that's one of the things that jams do well is, because it forces you to scope down, right? Like, so even if it's not great, right? Like you have this idea and after 4 days you implement it and it's not great. Well, that was 4 days, right? That's prototyping. That's rapid iteration. You learn very quickly, okay, that wasn't great, but you're going to then be able to take that experience and translate it to the next time. And this kind of goes back to the question that I answered before this, with, being a game developer is by making games, right? And rather than, it's like, hey, I want to make this giant thing. Make the giant thing in the future. Right now, work on something smaller that gets you closer to that dream goal. And you bite off a little piece. Like, what's one little piece of that long-term vision that will help you learn something to get better, to advance that idea, right? And ultimately to this question, right? Like, it'll help you answer whether or not that's going to be satisfying. And if you take enough little bites over time, you're going to have experience and an intuition, right? But you'll also hopefully have put those things in front of people and gotten feedback. And, maybe that helps you build your audience as well. And so by the time you get to that long-term vision, you have an audience and experience. And so you have a better sense of what's going to work or not work. So wonderful. Thank you. Those were really great questions. I'm not sure quite how we end up signing off, but I also just wanted to sort of personally again say thank you to the organizers for having me, and I really appreciate that. And most importantly, to everyone involved, stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope you really enjoy your jam. So thank you to the organizers and to everyone out there who's going to participate.